歡迎大家嚟到我哋今次嘅 training 啦。我哋今日會講希克展。
Thank you for coming to the training this evening. We're going to talk about Sig Galleries overview. I'm Winnie. I have some basic reminder for all of you, just like before. Please remember, change your name that is normally registered to the full name so that we can mark attendance. And we also welcome you to turn on your camera if you would like. Our training is going to be conducted in either Mandarin and Cantonese. Just like before, we have prepared interpretation. Someone can't hear? You can't hear us on any channel?
Loud and clear. I think that's the English problem.
Perhaps we need to do a trial. Our training is conducted in Cantonese and Mandarin. If you can't hear us, please let us know. We have arranged interpretation for you. You can choose the right language channel at the bottom of your screen. If you want to refer to the floor sound, Cantonese and Mandarin, you can turn it off. Otherwise, you can tune in to our interpreters. So I will repeat that in English.
So tonight's session will be in Cantonese and Mandarin, and our speaker would speak in their own preferred language, but we have arranged for simultaneous translation. So in the lower bar, if you see the language icon, you can click English for the English soundtrack. And if you click off, it would be kind of the original soundtrack, and then the Cantonese, it would be throughout Cantonese. So if all three languages channels are great, so thank you for the confirmation. So yes, 咁我就轉返去廣東話啦。
I will switch back to Cantonese in that case. So as I mentioned, please change your name to the full name, and please feel free to turn on your camera, and you can use the chat box if you have any questions. A final reminder, we have not yet disclosed information about the collections or pieces. So please, for the time being, this is just for your preparation. Even if you're super excited, don't tell anyone else. And no photo taking inside the galleries. So for this session and follow information is for your own research only. Once the venue is open to the public, you can share everything with your friends. That is a reminder every time we have this session. So back to our curator. We have Mr. Pili. He is the curator, and also Isabella. So over to you guys. Good evening. I'm very delighted. We have 2 hours to have exchanges with you. I think we have worked with some of you before. So me and Isabella will take you through the information. In 2012, on the same day we joined M+. And Mr. Winnie Lai decided to donate the items to us. So we've been preparing for 9 years for the SIG exhibition. I think curating time was 4 to 5 years between the two of us. So today we would like to take you through some information. we will spend about 1 hour. I will talk about the background, and Isabella will specifically talk about 1 to 2 galleries. And afterwards, we will leave time for you to ask questions. We want to emphasize that concerning this exhibition compared to other opening exhibition, the major difference is that this is a chronological exhibition. This is M+ collection from revolution to globalization. Many people will ask, what is this revolution then? This is actually a game that we play with. When you think about revolution, perhaps you will think about cultural revolution. It was around that time that Mr. Six started to work on this collection, and also on a different level, beginning from socialism, revolution, and we started from communism and then socialism. And then eventually it turned into a path to globalization. So this century is about revolution. And on the third level, in the final 3 decades in the 20th century, when it comes to art, everything stems from social changes and revolutions. Towards the end of the 90s, it collided with globalization until today. So there are really 3 levels of meanings. I also want to say a few words more. This is a collection donated to us in 2012. At the time, we had a commitment. After we open the venue, we are going to do 3 exhibitions in relation to this collection. This is the first one. So when Isabella and I thought about this, there would be 3 exhibitions, and the first one should give you a complete chronological presentation of the background. And then the following 2 exhibitions can focus on thematic approaches. So this is chronological. And what is the time frame? It begins in 1972, and 2 things happened that were quite important. Nixon visited China, and that actually brought many changes to China. China gradually started contacting the outside world. And it's the same year when the Sikh collection started. After 1969, when the revolution ended, things started to be normalized. Dr. Sikh donated the last piece in 2012. And that was also the same year when Chairman Xi took his position. That was right after the 2008 financial crisis and the end of the Olympic Games in China. So we will focus on this time period. After 08, in 2009, there was this occupation of Wall Street movement. And after 2012, our confidence and optimism in globalization sort of vanished. So it is about talking about China being a very closed-off country. So we are incorporating that into globalization, and then it reached the climax. And today we are reviewing, reflecting on globalization. Another point that we want to share with you is that if you want to explain this exhibition, you can contrast it with other local exhibitions. The main gallery in our thinking is about Hong Kong art and cultural changes, and Sick Gallery on the second floor. First floor is about changes in China. In terms of cultural development and backdrops, the two are very different. You can contrast the two to show the differences. That is something we also wanted to do. So this is chronological. Have you seen the artistry exhibition in 2015? It was also chronological, but it was of a smaller scale, about 80 pieces. This exhibition about 200, and the size about 3 times bigger. More importantly, this is a very different exhibition. If you understand the history of Chinese art, if you understand how to present Chinese art to the international audience, basically there are two approaches. First, all Chinese art can be considered as something that is very different from the Chinese socialism. So it's a kind of rebellion, resistance. That is one framework. The other approach is that it is huge transformation from what is traditional to contemporary. So our thinking is we have given up on those approaches. We want to focus on the relationships between Chinese culture and Chinese art. It can be very complex. We want to present that complicated side. Isabella is going to talk about it in greater details. By 2010, the entire tradition has been reviewed. So this exhibition will focus on how Chinese artists on this platform of globalization challenge traditional views and values, how they attempted on new media, so on and so forth. As curators, we're also very happy that in terms of history, around the world, we do not see any museum having this opportunity to run this chronological exhibition on Chinese art. So finally, we are making this happen. The exhibition is on our first floor of M+ in 6 galleries. There are actually more than 10 galleries in total. We are turning this exhibition, well, as you can see from the entrance, you come in from here. This part is about 70s and 80s in China, and then to the right-hand side, to the blue portion, that is the 90s to the millennium, and then further right, facing the changes, transformation beyond 2000. To the left, image and text is a kind of index. Other than the chronological story, we want to highlight some smaller details to talk about Chinese art transformation. So this is totally chronological in nature. and the galleries will take up the biggest cluster of galleries in M+. And there are two ways to look at the exhibition. On the two sides of the exit, they're over here. I will focus on the one on the left-hand side. For the first gallery, room 1 and 2, that is here. It is for the 80s and the 90s. When you enter, for this cluster of galleries, we will, as you can see here, 80s, 90s, and then on the top, room 3, that is 72 to 79. So we started from the 80s, and then we move back in time to the 70s. So first, we talk about the 85 new wave. In the middle of the 80s, we saw some very radical and active artistic movements. Why at that time? If you understand history, in 76, Chairman Mao died, and in 79, successor Mr. Deng Xiaoping took over the power. And Deng is a reformist. He focused on reforming the economy and the culture and also politics. So in the 80s, there was this new wave, new trend. From a very closed-off country, China transformed into an open country. So foreign art and culture were introduced. So in 4 to 5 times, many local artists saw a lot of foreign matters. They did some experiments, which were very different from political propaganda. So between 85, 87, 88, we call this the 85 new wave. The artists began to organize themselves into different exhibitions. It was the first time they wanted to do something avant-garde, things that were not totally accepted by the society. So many people would talk about the 85 new wave with the 1919 incidents. They are regarded as two important movements. So in 89, the artists decided to run their own exhibition, which was very revolutionary. Chinese artists emphasized on the fact that in the past, the country will allow you to run an exhibition, otherwise you can't do it. So they organized themselves. They found their own sponsors, and in 89, they ran this exhibition. It was very important. Why do we always talk about the year 1989? That is because of many political incidents, including the Tiananmen incident, and also this grand exhibition. We would like to highlight a few pieces, including the second state by Geng Jianyi. You can see different emotions of humans. You can see this laugh. There's no hair, there are no ears. On this black surface, you see 4 laughing faces. The mouths are open to different extents. It's like a process of laughing, but why is he smiling? So it is a rational attempt or attitude to analyze this act of laughing. What is behind this piece. It is about rationality. We should not be passionate in a blind manner. So it is about reflecting on Chinese culture, from Cultural Revolution to socialism activities. Such political passion was pushing people forward. But what does it mean for such passion? It was a kind of blind passion, and it was time for people to wake up from it. So it's a kind of rational attitude, and also represented reflection by the local artists in relation to Cultural Revolution. The second piece is a good example. Chairman Mao is placed under a grid in red. It's not about locking up Chairman Mao. Back then, there were no projectors or PPT presentation. So it was the way to replicate Chairman Mao's image by analyzing every grid of his painting or picture. So this is a representation of rational analysis of Chairman Mao. A and O represent MAO, the two letters in his name. The third piece, Look from the Sky, by Xu Bing. Many parts of the Chinese characters have been reorganized into words that do not exist. There's no real meaning. So it is a way for Chinese artists to re-examine tradition. In the 80s, things were different. It's about abstractism and questioning everything. At the bottom, you can see 7 sins. But it doesn't really refer to the 7 sins. During the exhibition, artists rejected performance arts to be included because it was not considered art. They did not want any controversy, so they rejected performance artists. But such artists felt that they did belong to the world of art. So 7 of them, without permission by the organizer, decided to do this on their own. Xiao Lu's work is the most famous. A female artist got this gun and fired it at one of her pieces, and it happened on the first day of the new year. So immediately the exhibition was closed off. Later on, it was reopened. So it represented a new direction for avant-garde artists. Rationality and reflection was the theme in that period. So how come such a radical movement happened? It was because of the new wave. Between 85 and 89, many things happened. So we will return to 85 New Wave Gallery, which is to the right-hand side, slightly to the top. Not so radical anymore, but more it is about reflection on cultural matters. When you see it, you will be moved. 4 to 5 meters tall. You see red calligraphy from certain famous literature. All of a sudden, when the doors were open, Chinese culture and Western culture, traditional culture and new culture all came together. So you can see Taoist symbols against propaganda, posters. So it is about mixing up of different cultures. After Nixon's visit, many abstract pieces came to China. All of a sudden, Chinese artists saw very new things, things that were not in line with socialism. So all of a sudden, they needed to run some experiments with abstraction. This is one of the artists. Compared with Frank Stella in the US and Reinhardt, it is actually quite similar. Zhang Jianjun's exhibition opened in K11. You can also visit it. This is the earliest abstraction attempt. So it is about rethinking of tradition. Zhang Jianjun committed himself into such abstract paintings. Modernism in 85 opened up some new desires when it comes to our bodies, our desires. Normally, they have to serve ideology of the state. But in the 80s, when it comes to sex, desires, and dreams, such ideas came to China. Originally, people did not want to express desires. This is Wang Peng. He painted ink on his body and he was rolling around on the paper because many artists painted the human body. And then he thought, I can do it by using my body. And then you can also see Gudexin's pieces. You see symbols of the genitals. It's about human desires. So when we move from 89 to 85, it is about abstraction and then sex and desire. They felt that it is the best way to express their reflection. And it was a convergence of traditional and modern culture. In the 70s, around the time of the Cultural Revolution, what was happening to the Chinese culture? You can see here, to the left, the water from the Milky Way down. This is a concept of contemporary art, typical socialistic pieces about a bunch of workers fixing this dam or bridge. So this is radiation layout. You can see the colors of the people. Everyone is very optimistic. Their expressions, very excited, very passionate. To the right is Tiny by Zhang Wei, a small landscape painting. The attempt here is modernism. So the Milky Water painting about 3 meters. Zhang Wei's painting A4 size, very small. It's a grayish landscape painting. And you can, he was using this impressionistic style. They were very realistic reflection of the mainstream approaches. some experimental pieces. In 79, it was the end of the revolution. We collected this Stars Group activities film. It was the only one that was left behind, underground film, recording what was happening at the time. So this is the first cluster. From 72 all the way to 89 and all the changes. The final transformation, the second part, when we move to room 4, you can see the most beautiful gallery. We call it the skylight with sunlight coming down. In fact, compared with other galleries, it's very different. We're all talking about 89 movements and changes. Actually, we should not just talk about China. Tiananmen incident took place in 89, and Guolingqiang collapsed in 91. Soviet Union was dissolved in 93. Eastern Europe was totally different. The original Cold War was gone. So when you talk about Chinese art, when you talk about 89 or 90, that is the major backdrop. When you explain it, because we are international in nature, you have to look at China from this international perspective. The demonstrations in Tiananmen Square, what is the greatest impact? If you understand Chinese history, well, you should know that Deng Xiaoping decided to do reform. First, do well the economy, and then everything else will follow. So economic reform moved very quickly, but for political and social reform, very slow. By 89, there were many protests. Later on, they failed. Deng Xiaoping is very smart. He used to say, doesn't matter what color the cat is, as long as it catches the mice, it's a good cat. In 2 to 3 years, he went to Shenzhen and he said, never mind the protests. We need to focus on socialism in China so that Chinese economy can be integrated in the global market. So in the 90s, there were 2 changes. One, China became highly commercialized. People focused on making money. We saw many artists beginning from the 80s. They were passionate, very optimistic, but the atmosphere changed by this time. Secondly, because socialism and the end of the Cold War, China was the only one country with socialism remaining. So many people were curious about China. China started to go abroad and take part in international exhibitions, and many collectors started collecting Chinese pieces. Chinese artists had no idea originally what the value would be attached to their pieces, but in the 90s, they started to have an idea. And of course, they started doing so through Hong Kong. In 93, there was this exhibition that took place at the Art Center in Hong Kong. So the 90s, the core is about how China has gone beyond its boundary. Internationalization, commercialization created certain impacts on the country. So the first impact for Chinese art, they were originally direct and radical. They became playful and cynical. Because artists couldn't really talk too much about politics. They became very cynical. and exaggerated and ironic. So you can see Fang Lijun's piece called 1995.2 is about the back of a person using the back to face the audience. So instead of Chairman Mao, he painted the back of himself facing the audience. This is a kind of message to tell you to go away, to fuck off. He will not cooperate. So over the years, China was changing a lot, but many things remain the same. This is a kind of ironic attitude. To the right, Water by Zhang Peili. He invited this very famous host called Xian Zhibin, representing CCTV and the image of the state. She read out the interpretation of the word water from the dictionary. So it was a formal act doing something rather silly. So there's a lot of cynicism contained in it. The second cluster is about the individual and then the collective. China, the culture is about the family. Every individual is a part of a family. So an extension of the family. This is has a lot to do with the Confucius thinking. But what about individualism? Artists started to explore it. Bloodline by Zhang Xiaogang is a good example. I think this is very much like Mona Lisa. Two children wearing outfits from the Mao's era planned family and the child policy started around that time. You can see small red lines on the child. And then on the right-hand side, eating. Bunch of men wearing quite messy outfits, eating seafood by the shore. So you can see the color that is used to represent human flesh and the seafood is very similar. It looks like every single person has no soul. They're all empty. The third part, political pop. So in the 90s, many things were brought to China. So the propaganda symbols and commercial symbols were combined together. Can you hear us, guys? Yes? So Wang is using symbols of Chanel and combined it with the Cultural Revolution. That is a kind of contrast. Important style indeed. The third one, other than international styles, many artists continue on certain concepts of art from the 80s. So it's about some artists in the 90s, they were concerned about social changes and they were doing their own conceptual pieces. You can look at some examples. There's Braiding by Lin Tianyao. about the identity of women. What happens to women when they lose all their hair? And at the back, there is this braid put together using cotton material. Because traditionally speaking, Chinese women would do a lot of embroidery, sewing activities. So it is a reflection on identity of being a woman. It may be very silly and meaningless. Yin Xiuzhen, another female artist, all the female clothing has been placed in this cement box. And then Song Dong's piece, Breathing, with so many changes in China, everything is changing. At the end, nothing has changed. So what can I change? In this cold winter weather, he went to Tiananmen Square and he started breathing on the ground, and the steam became ice. We have another small room to talk about the end of 90s, certain performance artists. They felt everything else was too commercial. They wanted to do something radical, some radical behavior to rebel against the society. A number of artists came together to do this piece, to add 1 meter to an anonymous mountain. How do we change this era other than breathing? How else can we change things? So perhaps we can add 1 meter to the mountain. It looks silly, but if you really think about it, what is behind this piece is a kind of sense of being lost and helplessness in the 90s. Things were just changing so quickly. What can you hold on to? So that's the environment for the 90s. And I will hand over to Isabella. I will talk about the other two galleries, room 6 and room 8, and then room 7 and room 9. The two galleries correspond to post-millennium changes in Chinese art. Mr. P talked about another piece in relation to international influence and how Chinese art was better known by the rest of the world. These two galleries will focus on post-2000, how Chinese art faced greater changes coming from internationalization. So they talk about specific time frames after the year 2000 and before and after the Olympic Games. We're also looking at internal changes. Previously, we were talking about external response, and here, internal response from the artists to such changes. So around the time of Olympic Games, there were rapid changes, urbanization, which was a very important topic. There was a lot of cultural and artistic groups emerging in the country, and the art market became more and more mature. So facing such changes, artists did a lot of responses. Facing changes is the first one. As cities grew at very fast pace, the transition from a rural to an urban society opened a chasm between the rich and the poor. So we focused more on daily topics to create
topic 入邊底下咧，其實有兩個大嘅 topic，我哋都係希望可以能夠帶出嚟。一個就係講緊一個都市化，而家個都市化唔單止淨係一個嘅係好 physical 一個嘅 physical 一個 architectural 嘅一種嘅變化之外咧，其實亦都係有一種係好對一個人嘅一個心理狀況、一個狀態嘅一種嘅影響嘅。咁所以其實喺呢一個嘅 facing change 呢個嘅 Gary 入邊咧，我哋其實以一個係都幾 loose 嘅方法，將一個係好聽唔到啊？繼續以一個都幾 loose 嘅一個嘅佈局啦，係將一個呢一個嘅係 physical 咯，同埋一個 psychological 一種嘅改變咧，係好 loose 咁樣去 structure 出嚟啦。咁而我哋呢一個嘅房入邊，其實尤其是係都比較特別咧，我哋就係一方面係從希望將成個 urbanization 呢個 topic 係可以由北面啦，去慢慢講到南面啦。咁所以
translation stop。
哦。
我們等一下。
好。
Can you hear me? This is English translation. So we wanted to cover the northern part to the southern part in relation to urbanization. We wanted to cover Beijing, Shanghai in the northern part and then move to the Pearl River Delta. So slowly from the north to the south. So urbanization doesn't just affect some Chinese people, but it is a very comprehensive scenario. So in the first part, we will focus more on how we relate to the built environment, how economic changes have impacted on it. And you can see some pieces from various artists, some photographs and some documents showing the building of some skyscrapers. I would like to highlight three pieces. First, by Yan Xiuzhen, is called Beijing Opera. It was what she went through between the 90s and the millennium. What happened in Beijing? It was a total upheaval from the inside to the outside. Economic development and capitalistic movements brought certain physical changes to the city, affecting many ordinary people. You can see the installation. It is representing three photographs and some small wooden stools on the floor and sound recording. The three photographs are depicting ordinary people's daily life and daily activities. You can see some of them are singing Chinese opera, and some men are playing chess in a back alley, and then some other people in the park. They're playing chess. And you can see some bird cages. Every morning, some elderly people will bring their birds to the park. What is interesting about this piece? The artist has captured daily life of elderly people, and it contrasts urbanization in an interesting way, because urbanization is about vibrancy, it's about youth. The artist focused on the local community in such a way. A small angle of their community life is a snapshot showing us that urbanization and the changes it brings, to a certain extent, to some small local communities, there will be impacts. So how do we look at this new and the old? How do they coexist? What kind of lifestyle it becomes? So the artist made the stools. So it is at the floor level with the small stools, and people can actually sit on the stools. So you become sort of like a participant in the scene. When you reach the gallery, you will see Xu Zhen's piece. It's right next to Liang Shuo's Urban Peasants. It's a kind of good echo. Liang's piece is also about urbanization, with skyscrapers being built, and at the same time, there are many migrant workers who come to the city in the year 2000. Almost 10 million such workers lost their farmland, so they moved to the cities to look for jobs. Very often, they would take up lower level tasks and positions. So the artist is depicting workers on the streets. Normally, people don't pay them much attention. So they are life-size sculptures around the same height as you and me. The sculptures capture such urban peasants on the streets, different postures. They wanted to look trendy coming to the cities. So you can see some of them are wearing a suit, a proper jacket, or some new jewelry pieces. It represents the wealth they have accumulated after working for some time in the cities. But you can see some small details showing that they want to be modern, but is rather awkward. So they don't really fit into the reality in this whole picture of urbanization. And then in the middle, by Lin Yilin, performance work, safely maneuvering across Linhe Road. So compared to the other pieces, it is about the other two artists reacting to urbanization, and Mr. Lin is focusing on Guangzhou, which is very close to Hong Kong. How Guangzhou responds to urbanization. Mr. Lin is part of this arts group. It was established in Guangzhou in the early 90s. And they would respond often to the what's happening in Guangzhou or Pearl River Delta in relation to urbanization. So this piece took place in Guangzhou. There was no advanced planning or alert. He started moving some bricks for a construction site from one side of the road to the other side. And then slowly, he constructed a brick wall. This act seemingly interrupted a lot of road traffic, and symbolically, he was talking about interrupting this rapid building process. Whether there was some kind of interaction to stop it. The other part of facing change, we are talking about how the artists are facing the built environment, some new tensions, how urbanization affected them mentally and how they reacted. There are some famous pieces here, rather interesting. First, Xu Zhen's shouting. Xu Zhen is an artist based in Shanghai. Before he created this piece, he went to Beijing to live for some time, and then he returned to Shanghai, his hometown. This piece is very simple, very short, only 3 minutes long, a video. He was filming this place in Shanghai, very busy street. If you've been to Shanghai, you will know Huaihai Road. All of a sudden, he shouted, and many people looked at him, looked at the camera. Actually, you don't see the face of the artist. You only know his existence because of the sound. So the focus is on the action of shouting. During the performance, he realized that pedestrians became his subjects. I think the piece is very straightforward with a bit of roughness. Some people will think it's silly, but I think it is straightforward and rough. It is about how people lived in this urbanization in a fragile way, and there's a lack of consciousness. So this act also brings out how urbanization affects the society, the city. Sometimes we don't even notice it. When we face new changes, will people begin to have this fragile side? Cao Fei in the middle, whose utopia? I think you all know this quite well about Cao Fei because he previously had an exhibition in Hong Kong. He's a Guangzhou artist. This piece is deeply engaged in the local community, especially the Pearl River Delta. He spent 6 months in Dongguan factory called Oxram. Siemens is their mother company. This is an on-site project. For 6 months, he did a lot of research. He talked to many workers. He observed them on a daily basis, how they worked. There are 3 chapters to this piece. Some focused on the production of light bulb, the manufacturing process in the factory, and then the other chapters, just like what you see on the slide, were about the workers. They wanted to play this most outstanding role. He wanted to say that many people moved to the cities to work because of urbanization. They wanted to be compensated with money, and at the same time, urbanization is about creating this utopia. But if you're in a factory, you have this robotic life. You begin to question, is this really the utopia that you want to achieve? Another piece by Zheng Guogu, The Landscape of the Age of Empire #2. Zhang is an artist based in Yangjiang, Guangdong, a second-tier city. Many of his pieces are related to his daily life and his own city. This piece is about this computer game. It's a video game, very famous one, Age of the Empire. Some scenes from the game can be placed in reality and materialize it into a real setting. So in Yangjiang, he bought some places as his own artist playground. He continued to set up some architectural structures and settings to materialize scenes from the video game. You can see some sort of collage on the pieces. They were collected by him from the internet or magazines or newspapers, small advertisements. Many of them are related to Hong Kong. For example, some gossipy news about Hong Kong movie stars. He wanted to use such information from the mass media into his pieces. So it is about this new landscape in a time of changes. It's not about the built environment, but also it is about a new landscape that is emerging, which is new digital environment that took place in parallel in that year. Next, in parallel, we're telling another story next door, something we also want to bring to the audience. On the other hand, we're talking about urbanization, and over here, we're talking about many artists who took part in biennials and other artistic activities. Many artists in China wanted to rethink about possibilities of Chinese art so that it can connect to more international art. We see many artists who begin to try different medium. They will have their own paintings and sculptures with more radical elements, performances. They would try conceptual photography and video creations, hoping to present new experiences to the people. In this session, there are a few pieces I want to highlight and share with you. First, Sun Yuan and Peng Yu's piece called Civilization Pillar. It is an important piece because it illustrates what happened around the time of the millennium. Post-Sense and Sensibility exhibition, more than 10 artists participated, and they were all exhibited in the opening display. If you see what happened in that exhibition, many young artists wanted to talk about social changes at the time. They felt powerless, so they started to think of another way. Other than painting and sculpting, they wanted to try something more radical so that their own desires can be turned into provocative pieces to show their concepts. So Civilization Pillar was completed in 2001. And it was first exhibited in this triannual exhibition. It is actually 3 meters tall. It's very prominent. It looks like some historical monuments, but actually, the artists used human fat to create this piece. The artists said that they obtained the fat from clinics who did a lot of liposuction and plastic surgeries. So they painted the fat on layer after layer to turn it into a pillar. So it is talking about shared civilization, is general progress. We're all progressing at the same time. And on a deeper level, they want to use fat to create this civilization pillar. They're being very cynical. In this civilized living, there's a lot of wealth, a lot of excessive things that we don't need. So it is very meaningful piece, and it's rather shocking and provocative. And then you will see more exploration with different medium in terms of photography. There were some important developments. For example, Zhang Hui's piece. There are two pieces here. They may seem ordinary, nothing special. I think when you were in secondary school, university, you will have group classes, but Zhang Hui, he took group photographs involving different organizations. He was talking about communism and this sense of collective memory, which is a very important theme. And during urbanization, such small factories, for them to have an opportunity to take such group photos is actually becoming less and less likely. So he did this as a kind of summation, a kind of ceremony to represent group or collective memory. And then Yang Shenzhong, other than Zhang Li, he's another important media artist, especially when it comes to experimentation by the use of videos. This is called fishbowl video installation. You can see 3 monitors placed on top one another in this water-filled fish tank. Someone is saying, "I'm not a fish, I'm not a fish, I'm not a fish." That is the one thing that is repeated in the videos. So video is used in a humorous way with a lot of fantasy, imagination to bring the audience into this state of hypnotism. It's a kind of new experience when we look at video installations. You see something and also you're being hypnotized, you're being told that there is this potential visual cognitive experience or sensory experience. So other than continuous exploration with new mediums, it is a time when you see artists who rethink about tradition. So through exploring life, they started to revisit traditional techniques and themes. And then they would use contemporary practices to merge with traditional approaches. So it's blending tradition with the 21st century, new cultural identity. We can see very good transition from Zhang Hui to the pieces by Hong Lei. They are photographic pieces. Traditional plants and birds are presented with photographic means. It's a kind of restatement, but the poetic pieces back in the Song Dynasty, his pieces carry violent elements. So it's a kind of intimation, but it's very sad. It's about violence. And also a flower that is withering away. And Hu Xiaoyuan's piece, another nominated artist for the prize. In 2005, when the piece was being created, a documentary was commissioned to create this piece. That's the reason for such creation. The artist wanted to try to talk about feelings, emotions, and ideas to people close to him. It was like a love letter. He used his own hair to do embroidery and created flowers, birds, with some traditional stories or themes. And then he would add other images, a different part of himself. So the artist is using a new interpretation to explore tradition. He's talking about the tradition, but at the same time, he's talking about his own identity and also his own privacy. Finally, image and text. This is an index presentation from room 1 to 9. If we are presenting something chronological about Chinese contemporary art story, then room 10, image and text. In the process of curating, we saw some special scenarios. Many Chinese contemporary pieces, we see how images and text would be combined by the artists. It is talking about the artist seeing how we live our daily life, receiving a lot of political and commercial messages affecting us. So our daily life, the visual culture, combines images and texts. For example, Wang Du's piece, when he moved to Paris, he created this piece. It was inspired by what happened in 1999, the political tension on the Balkans, and in 1999, a US fighter jet came down and bombed the Chinese embassy building in Belgrade by accident. And that was a turning point in the war. The artist felt that how the incident was presented by the media, whether they were neutral or not. He did a lot of research among Western press in France, Germany, Switzerland. There were many angles reporting on the same incident, and he read more reports and coverage. And he felt the media, the press, may not be fully neutral, so he created this installation. You see two mountains? They were all broken down. because they were put together using collected newspaper. And the two presidents, the US President Bill Clinton and Yugoslavian President, they are presented. And then some bomber jets, fighter jets, and a child standing on this media mountain, a lot of information. So it symbolizes that in the war, this is actually an orphan who lost his family. And another piece by Zhou Tiehai. He's very creative and he knows how to project his own image onto media pieces. For example, fake covers. He published his own image. It's been appropriated on some very well-known news covers. This is Newsweek or Art News. He would project himself onto them. So it is a kind of exaggerated approach to comment on something. He will also use some text, too materialistic, too spiritualized. That is what was happening to the Chinese art market. That's a very quick summary. Yes, time is really running out. This is an open exhibition. I think you can come up with your own ideas. We will talk about the final two routes. There are two entrances. You can take either one. The formal one, well, this is the one we would like to guide people to go there. So that is 89 and then 85 New Wave, abstraction, and then 4 here, Cultural Revolution, and then 70s, changes in China, and then number 5 here, the 90s, 5, 6, 7, 8, the entire changes in the 90s, and number 9 here is the Eastern Village in Beijing, radical movements, and then coming to 10, urbanization and daily life changes, and then 11 here, all the way to the top to 12. What Isabella talked about. Reflection on tradition and exploration in a new medium, and when you reach 12, breakout space for some learning and resting. We have another route. Sometimes we can enter from the skylight room here, go through the entire space. What you normally understand about contemporary art in China, and then go to number 2 here, start from the 70s. Why such things happen to the Chinese history, and then number 3, number 4, 85, New Wave, and then 5 to 6, 89, and then number 7 here, you can see because of the 90s, there were certain transformations, and then you go to 8 and 9, just like route number 1. So these are the 2 routes we will recommend. Suggested resources. You can see a list here. About curating Sikh pieces and also Art of Modern China. It's quite easy to read by Wu Hong, Chinese art at the crossroads and contemporary Chinese art. Wu Hong represents the academia from the US, how they looked at Chinese art. And Gao Minglu's book comes from the Chinese angle. And then some online resources. Isabella offered this mapping Chinese art resource about overall reflections. A lot of information here. And then M Plus magazine, many artists here. Their pieces have been highlighted. We've done some interviews with those artists. If you have more time, you want to know more, you can go to Asia Art Archive website. They have a lot of online and offline materials. Finally, what is this SIG collection? What is the content? You can see all of that on the final page. We are overrunning a little bit, but we can leave some time to you to ask questions. Thank you, the two of you. As we said, we have overrun a little bit, but we have reserved some time for Q&A and some announcements. We can open up to your questions. You can submit your questions in the chat room. This is not your only opportunity. Let's go to the slide for room 4. There are many slides though. Perhaps the first one. Room 4.
Session. 那这一章我们就是想讲
This one. We wanted to talk about changes with Chinese artists because previously you've seen the political pop. This is about circulation exchanges with the rest of the world. They also got influenced by market interest. So they continued on with rebelling against what was happening at the time. Are there any questions? You can ask anything. If you don't want to type, you can speak. One question is about from 70s onwards. Is there a special era particularly important? If I answer now, it's difficult, but I would choose my route. Can I go back to that slide? Normally, if you come to number 1 position here, if you stand here, you can look at the important piece, political pop, to the left. And you can see the film and then 2 propaganda pieces. I think that is a good point to start your introduction. From the 70s to the millennium, China's gone through major changes. You can see the rebellion, the resistance from the artists. And then you can go to number 6 and talk about 89, the exhibition, and then at 7, position 7, you can see Zhang Xiaogang's piece. And then that's about it. About 20 minutes time, and then they can leave. If they want to understand more, at 11 and 12 or between that, you can pick one place to talk about Chinese art and tradition, how the tradition has returned. So the whole thing can be done in 30 minutes.
睇到你哋嘅建議路線，其
We
實
can
主要
see your suggested routes. They are mainly on the chronological galleries. So what about gallery 10? Do you want to deal with it with a different approach? Gallery 10, because we think the entire exhibition is quite tiring. So you've been talking for 1 hour or more. So 10 and 11 are for people to rest, because we're talking about very long routes with video works. So this is a place for people to sit down and take a break. I don't think that you should talk too much here. You need to leave them time to watch things. Next week, we will go to the site and then you will have a better understanding. Some other questions about possibility of a curator-guided talk, we can respond. We do have sessions. We have assigned you to the talk, and sometimes you can enter the site and have some first-hand experience, and then you can plan your suggested route. We'll also have practice sessions. You will also be able to go inside the galleries to have a look. Information about the slides. Can we refer to Route 2 again? Well, don't worry, because we will send the PowerPoint presentations to you. We do understand. Mr. Pili has suggested his route, focusing on the North Court. If you need some assistance for other tours, perhaps it's not possible to go into such great details to go from point 1 to 12. We have to think about how to lead the tours. We'll go back and talk about how, during the next session of training, we can offer something that is more deep compared to this overview tour. Do we have any other questions? We still have 5 minutes. So this is a comment. It's not like previous sessions. We'll go back and talk about how we can give you an overview, because yes, it's a very big space. Thank you very much for your suggestion, indeed. I think on that day, we won't talk about the pieces because it's a huge space. There are many galleries involved. The main gallery, when you enter, there's a lot of space. So we won't talk about specific pieces, but we recommend you to stand at a certain location so that you can see different things and have this first-hand feeling. So it will help you. Of course, everyone will present in a different manner. Different approaches are all possible. If there are no more questions, I think it's a rather overwhelming exhibition space. We will have other opportunities to ask questions to Mr. P and Isabella. I have some announcements at the end. I want to remind you of 3 things. We have emailed you to remind you about the passport photo. Remember to send your photos to our colleagues so that we can prepare your pass. for you to go into our galleries. Please send your photos over as soon as possible. Another email's been sent about the dates for the remaining trainings. Many have asked, any opportunities for hands-on experience? 12th and 16th of October, we have rehearsals. This is actually optional. If you want another opportunity to practice inside the space, you can sign up for those 2 events. By the 3rd of October, please notify us. So 2 days and optional. And then today, you should have received another email from my colleague about group allocation and your rosters. We have already done the allocation. Please check your email on which days you can come to the venue to do your shift. It's done based on the information you provided in relation to your availability.
咁我哋所以跟翻就預你其實你哋對於嗰個時節係
So basically, you should be okay with the assigned slots
月7號之
unless
前
there are some changes to your schedule. Please tell us by the 7th of October. As for group allocation and the details, on the 9th, we'll have another online session. We'll tell you more details. So, and as your photographs, rehearsal days, and also the roster has been sent out. Any more opportunities for practicing? Yes, we will offer you 2 sessions, and then there will be other opportunities. So look at the dates and reply us. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, our 2 curators. Goodbye.